the diet and lifestyle is really good at stopping the damage.
Okay.
If you want to rebuild or rehabilitate, you're going to have to exercise. And E-stim augments the exercise. So
Okay.
it's particularly good for people who've had a lot of asymmetry. So in my case, my left leg was far smaller than my right leg. And so adding the E-stim allowed me to get things back to symmetric strength. And then I continue to use E-stim all of the time. And I'll talk a lot more about this in my revised book,
Hmm.
because I have a lot of scar in my spinal cord. So the output from my brain to my legs will never be the same because of those scars. So I will always exercise and augment on the left side of my legs to keep that symmetry intact.
Hi, everyone. In today's podcast, I am going to be interviewing Dr. Terry Wahls. And Dr. Terry Wahls is an incredible medical practitioner that has overcome the odds around multiple sclerosis. And her story is really, really amazing for you to hear and for you to share with others. And as you know, when we do the Eat Real to Heal podcast, we want you to share it with others. If you feel inspired by it, if you know that it has information in there that can help others, the key to healing this world is to consistently share stories with others that have truth behind them, that have inspiration and motivation behind them, and that have hope behind them. So I really hope that you take the time to forward this podcast to someone else. It's really simple. You just subscribe to our podcast, press the little up arrow, email or text it to somebody, and just tell them, hey, you know what? I love you. I was thinking about you. I think you would love this podcast. And then leave it in their hands. That's all you have to do. Now, back to Dr. Terry Wahls. In this podcast, we cover some incredible topics. I first learned about Dr. Terry Wahls when I saw her TED Talk, which is amazing. Everybody needs to see that. And then, of course, we dive into what it's like to be a doctor, to defy the odds, to turn to plant-based food as medicine, to come up with a protocol that is applicable to vegans, applicable to vegetarians, and also applicable to the modern day Paleo, all in the name of reversing autoimmune disorders, particularly multiple sclerosis. So listen to this podcast right till the very end, because you're going to want to hear what she has to say about her dream for the future of medical schools as well. Now, let me tell you in detail who Dr. Terry Wahls is. I mean, her bio is so incredible. So I'm going to take the time to read it to you so I don't miss a single thing, because she's such an inspiration. So Dr. Terry Wahls is an Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. Now, just so you know, when doctors go to med school, they don't study functional medicine. They have to study that after they graduate. And so she's a functional medicine certified practitioner. She is also a clinical professor of medicine at the University of Iowa, where she actually conducts clinical trials. And this is what's so special about Dr. Terry Wahls, is that she's just not seeing patients every day and then billing out at the end of the day and then moving on to the next patient the next day. She's actually doing research and conducting clinical trials, which is incredible. So in 2018, she was awarded the Institute for Functional Medicine's Linus Pauling Award. And if any of you haven't heard of Linus Pauling, please check him out. He's this amazing biochemist and scientist who understood the importance of orthomolecular nutrition and medicine, functional medicine, internal medicine, and he really knew how nutrition affected our health. So he is a Nobel Prize winner as well, so you definitely want to learn as much as you can about Linus Pauling if you haven't been exposed to him in high school or university. So she's also a patient who recovered from secondary progressive multiple sclerosis. And she was in a tilt wheelchair for years, for 4 years, in fact. And Dr. Terry Wahls was able to actually change her diet. She ate ton of vegetables. She ate lots of fruits, and she was able to overcome her multiple sclerosis, get out of her reclining tilt wheelchair, and she now rides her bike to work every single day, or as much as she can. But she's able to do that. And she's going to tell you the story there. She has incredible books, The Wahl Protocol, How I Beat Progressive MS Using Paleo Principles in Functional Medicine, and The Wahl Protocol, which is a radical new way to treat all chronic autoimmune conditions. And then she also has the Wahl Protocol, Cooking for Life. So that is also meant for all autoimmune conditions, including multiple sclerosis. So let's dive into this podcast so you can hear all about her. But before we begin, I do need to let you know about our incredible program that we have coming out, which we've already launched. It is called Richer at Work. And this is meant for corporations of 50 or more employees that want to turn their employees' health around. 60% of North Americans are battling obesity and at least one, if not more, chronic degenerative diseases. This is an epidemic. 75% of North Americans are actually obese. And so that needs to be turned around because obesity and chronic diseases are correlated. And that needs to be understood because we need to tackle both simultaneously if we are going to stand a chance of people reclaiming their health, reclaiming their mental health status, and being able to be contributing, mindful, giving, productive members of our society. And when I say productive, that means having the energy after a day of work to be able to go be of service, either serving for a nonprofit or for your children or for your partner or for your community. So if we don't have enough energy to even make it through the day, we definitely don't have enough energy to be able to be creative about the environmental issues that we have going on. So we can't get out there and find solutions, let alone lift a finger to actually do anything different. So we started Richer at Work to be able to help employees get back their productivity, not just in the workplace, but in their lives. So go to our website, check out the link. If you know of a company, a key decision maker, an HR person, a CEO of a company that wants to bring us in, we are going to handhold the company and its employees through our Eat Real to Heal program. And that includes weekly group coaching. It includes our online course, a copy of our book, a full workshop where we actually end with a Eat Real to Heal meal so you can experience what real plant-based, unrefined whole food tastes like, and it's delicious, I promise you. So we provide all of that to the employees, and then of course we handhold them really for the life of our organization, for the life of myself, for the life of our courses. They get that weekly group coaching, and then they also get invited into our tribe where they can ask questions 24/7, and we have a team that responds so that we actually see these employees right through the reversal of their disease, which means getting off medications, being able to cancel a surgery, working with their entire whole health team, which we teach them how to make so that they have people advocating for them and their health, where drugs and surgery will not be the first course of action. Instead, it'll be activating their own body, their innate healing capabilities of their own body to actually tackle the chronic disease and mental health illness that they are suffering with. And then CEOs and companies get to experience the benefits of having a super happy, healthy, and productive workforce. So check out that program and definitely sign up and share this information with others. So without further ado, it is a deep honor to be able to have interviewed Dr. Terry Wahls. And so let's welcome her to the show and begin. So welcome, Dr. Terry Wahls, to our Eat Real to Heal podcast. It is a pleasure to have you on our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Terry Wahls, can I call you Terry?
Oh, please.
Okay, wonderful. So One of the reasons why I've wanted to have you on the show for so long is because when I first came out of my training in California, where I studied the Gerson therapy, I was actually, really thinking there's no way that this can be true, that chronic diseases, diagnosed diseases can be reversed using anything other than prescribed medications and surgeries. And really, that's the only way to do it. And when I first learned that you could use food to heal, I was really trying to disprove everything I just learned about the Gerson therapy. So I started to look around. And of course, I stumbled across your TED talk that you gave. Is that about 10 years ago now?
Well, almost. It was 2011.
2011. And there was something quite profound in that TED talk that really spoke to me because I was also doing my pre med science courses and I was on the path to go to med school. So, as I had been in the health world and the nutrition world, and then took my pre med courses, the biochemistry textbooks and the chemistry and the biology textbooks actually just said food is medicine at the end of the day. It's really what it talks about, that we need nutrients in our body to keep our bodies healthy. And the part of your TED talk that I love the most is when you were laying in the anti-gravity chair. You had, been trying to treat your MS for a number of years, and you started to go back to those biochem principles that you had learned about probably when you took your pre-med courses. Can you tell us a little bit about what that experience was like of being a medical doctor, having practiced for years, being diagnosed, and then
Sure.
arriving at that place?
Well, at the time of my diagnosis, yeah, I'm a conventional internal medicine doc in academic medicine. And so I absolutely believe in the latest science in the New England Journal of Medicine.
Yeah.
And so I know what I want to do is treat myself with the best technology, the newest drugs at the best center doing clinical research, which was the Cleveland Clinic. Saw their best people, took the newest drugs, and went steadily downhill. My Cleveland Clinic doctors mentioned the work of Ashton Embry and Lauren Cordain, who were advocating for a paleo diet. And so I read their scientific papers, slogged through them, thought, okay, well, there's a scientific rationale here. And so I took a big breath and went back to eating meat because I'd been a vegetarian for 20 years. And so I gave up all grain, all legumes, all dairy, and reintroduced meat. That took me several months and continued to decline. I had slowed the speed of my decline, and so I figured that was like a phenomenal triumph because I'd been going down very, very rapidly. And so the fact I just was now just going down slowly, I considered that to be a phenomenal success because I now had secondary progressive MS,
Mhm.
and I had completely accepted that there was no return of functions once lost. But once I hit the tilt recline wheelchair, I'm like, okay, I'm clearly on track to become bedridden. And I was worried I might be on track to become demented. And I'd also, since 1980, so I'd already had about 20 years of steadily worsening trigeminal neuralgia, the electrical face pains that like jolts of electricity that come on more randomly. They were becoming more frequent, more severe, and getting progressively more difficult to turn off. So my biggest fear was that that would turn on and be permanently on. So with that background, I thought, okay, I got to do everything I can to slow my decline. So the first thing I do is look for animal model studies for drug studies. Then fortunately, in the next year, it occurs to me like, well, this is crazy because I can't access these drugs. Those drugs are probably another 5 to 10 years in the pipeline.
Mhm.
In the meantime, I'm taking the new biologic drugs and they aren't doing anything to my trajectory. So like, okay, then I had an aha, like, I ought to start reading things I could access. And so this was neurodegeneration across many disease states, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, Huntington's, ALS. And all of that, I saw that mitochondria dysfunction was a big driver. So now I'm thinking like, okay, what could I do to help the Krebs cycle? What could I do to help my mitochondria?
Yeah.
How could I get the electron transport cycle to work better? What can I do about the cell membranes? And so this gets me reading, again, animal model studies. So I'm looking at mouse and rat studies. that are affecting those things. So I'm adding a variety of supplements. After about 6 months, I think I'm wasting my money, and the skeptic rears up her head, and I stop all those supplements. And
And what
36.
supplements were you taking at that time? Because I
So
remember there was one video that I came across of yours where you had mentioned you had been a vegetarian for almost 20 years or over
mhm,
20 years, and
yeah,
you had looked at the fact that you had also never taken B12
right.
at
So
that time.
actually, my Cleveland Clinic docs had told me to take B12, so I had been on B12.
Okay.
Um, Now, not on the doses that I'm on now, so on much higher doses, but I had been taking B12, 500 micrograms.
Yeah, that's not very
I
much. Yeah.
and I added um, more. Originally, it was flax oil. Now I switched over to cod liver oil, and I added creatine, carnitine, lipoic acid in CoQ.
And did you see and you saw some improvement or no
No,
improvement or
not at
how
all. Not at all. So after 6 months, I said, ah, "This is worthless."
and were
So
you
I stopped
taking
it all.
high dose or low dose or
Oh,
what the
I
bottle
can't.
said?
I can't remember the precise doses.
Okay, so I'm curious about that because I know a lot of people
Well, let me
would
finish my story.
yeah, okay, finish your story,
Come on,
finish your
come
story.
on. So I quit, and then 36 hours later, I just really couldn't function. I couldn't
Oh,
get out of bed. I couldn't go to work. On the third day, my wife comes in and says, honey, I think I ought to take these. So I take them, and the next morning I could go to work. So I thought, wow, now that's really interesting. So 2 weeks later, I did the same thing. I stopped them all, and I did okay for 24 hours. On the 36th hour, I really couldn't function very well. It was a struggle to get up. And so again, I missed work. I waited 3 days. I started everything up, and I thought, okay, so they're not recovering me. All they're doing is slowing down the decline. Clearly, they're doing a lot for the fatigue and my function, probably more than at that point. I'm now on Cellcept, and so I am jazzed. I'm like, okay, I got to read more science. And so I am really excited that I am figuring out stuff that my neurologist is not mentioning, my primary care doc is not mentioning, and I'm slowly piecing this out. And so I'm reading the internet. When I look at these articles, I go back. If there's no PubMed citations, I don't bother reading the article because I want everything to be based in science. But over the years, I began to slowly add a few more supplements. And what I would tell your readers is that as fond as I am of the paleo diet did not fix me. This increasingly intensive supplement program did not fix me. When I discovered functional medicine and I tweaked my supplement program based on their course in neurodegeneration, that didn't fix me. But when I sat down and had this big aha, like, what if I take this long list of supplements I'm taking and go figure out where they are in the food supply and redesign? I'm now like, okay, I think the paleo diet evolutionary stand makes a lot of sense, but who knows how we should really structure it? So I should structure it a little more precisely to match the nutrients that the science seems to be telling me that my brain and mitochondria need. So that took me about 3 more months of research. And what was really helpful there was the Linus Center for Micronutrients.
yeah.
So then now I had this long list of foodstuffs that I'm using. But as I recovered and I started using this in my clinic, you just can't give people a long list of here's the stuff to eat. You have to give them a framework that's easily teachable, easily to remember, and things you could implement here in rural Iowa with small rural grocery stores. And that's how I created the framework that I teach by. And certainly there are other frameworks that can work to design a nutrient dense diet, but you have to find a framework that you can teach and
Mhm.
can work with the audience that you are most serving.
Yeah, definitely. And it's
And
that's a
for me, it
struggle.
was veterans of basically living on food stamps. Right.
Um,
You have to teach the concept that people can use in their everyday life that they could use as they go out hunting for food in their environment.
Totally.
And for me, that was small rural grocery stores in Iowa with people who would have high school education. So and people who are often living on food stamps.
Yeah, and working two jobs if they, are working. So not just one job, so they don't have tons of time to, probably
Correct.
prepare food. Yeah.
Or that they were farmers, which meant they were working all day long.
Yeah, exactly. So when you made the change to the diet, then to incorporate, these additional nutrients via food itself, what happened then?
Yeah. So it's sort of interesting. So what I did was I uh, dropped the meat down, ramped up the vegetables. So now it's a moderate to moderate low protein, lots of vegetables. And I tell the public it's 9 cups of vegetables. In my case, I just had this tremendous craving for greens, and so it's probably much more like 12 to 15 cups of vegetables, and probably 2 palm-sized servings of meat, fish, or poultry. And I organized it along greens, and then along the sulfur-rich was the cabbage, onion, mushroom family. And I did that to boost detox enzymes and intracellular glutathione, and then deeply colored pigments, green, blue, purple, black, especially. But I was trying to get people in all colors. And then in my clinics, in my own, and so that's my entry level diet. And then I personalize it based on their clinical response and their diagnoses and what I'd see happening to their lipid values. So we had multiple progression levels, and I cover that in my book. So that
Yeah.
because you take the average Iowan and probably the average American or Western diet consumption. It's a lot of processed food, a lot of grain-based food, a lot of white flour and sugars. And so even my entry-level diet is just a phenomenally large change.
Hmm.
So so we have a basic diet to start with, and even I'd say 80% of my folks had a remarkable transformation on that basic level diet. And we didn't have to go any further. About 20%, we would have to continue to move them along to a more intensive intervention.
And so what was like what was this like for you as a, Western medically trained doctor who had studied intensely? You had been running clinical trials already. You weren't the average GP, that is
Well, so the
provider.
research I was doing was in another area. It was um, diagnostic error and missed test results. So I'd not done clinical trials before.
Okay.
I certainly was teaching residents to be very skeptical of complementary alternative medicine.
Yeah.
I thought that was a waste of time. I completely believed in the low fat diet. And so I'd been a low fat vegetarian
Hmm.
for a long time. And so I had actually a very low HDL, relatively high triglycerides, even though I was very, very low fat.
Hmm.
And by the way, my lipid profile dramatically improves as I implement the Wahls diet. The HDL goes up, triglycerides go down, total cholesterol goes down. Actually, the total cholesterol went up a little bit, but my HDL also went up quite remarkably.
And when you were a vegetarian for 20 years, were you predominantly like the 10 fistfuls of fruits and vegetables, or were you on the refined Western,
Well,
typical standard American, like vegetarian diet?
well, people would think had a phenomenally a great diet. Lots of grains,
Yeah.
lots of legumes,
Yeah.
um, you know, vegetables. Um, but again, it's very low fat, and so a lot of starch. Now, it turns out that I have a severe reaction to gluten. So now, if I have any gluten, my face pain turns on
Mm.
in about 6 to 24 hours to really quite severe levels. If my face pain turns on, I'll sort of model it for you. I'll have a little twinge at first, close my eyes, and this little paroxysmal spasm. In the next hour or so, it'll get to the point where I'm grunting. I can't suppress the grimace in the next hour. Then it gets to a much louder grunt, and I have difficulty standing. I have difficulty maintaining postural tone. And then the next hour, it's so intense that when the jolts come, I can't see. The world is white, and I can't talk. I'm drooling because if I talk or swallow, it triggers the face pain. Light triggers the face pain. Touch triggers the face pain. Sounds trigger the face pain. A breeze across my skin triggers the face pain. So you can bet I'm very careful about what I eat.
Yeah, definitely. And have you, like, I'm sure you have, but have you come to any conclusions about the mechanisms of action that are happening with the gluten in the body that
Oh,
triggers that?
sure. So again, it has to do with your genetic susceptibility. Then it probably the next, so you have to have the genes, probably DQ, DQ8,
Yeah.
and 95% of those who have gluten sensitivity have those two genes, but not all. So there's clearly another pathway. And then there's a microbiome alteration,
Yeah.
a leaky gut. The gluten gets into your bloodstream, unfortunately, and then you're sensitized. And now, once you're sensitized, your immune cells will never forget.
Exactly.
And so, and you don't want to have gluten on your skin, on your tongue, in your gut. It
Exactly.
activates your innate immune system, and all those cytokines go up. You can also, if you've activated your antibodies as well, then depending on your other genetic factors, environmental factors, those antibodies may also cross attack in your brain, your myelin, your cerebellar structures. There are a lot of anti-brain IgG antibodies, and there's a high rate of thyroid, anti-thyroid antibodies. Asthma is fairly common, psoriasis is common, variants of inflammatory bowel disease. And so in my clinical practice, I counsel everyone with an autoimmune disease, take gluten and dairy and eggs out of your diet, uh, you know, implement a more nutrient dense diet. And we talk about how to do it as a vegetarian, a vegan, or a meat eater.
Awesome.
And,
Yeah.
and then we see what we get from there. And for many, that's enough. It just leads to a dramatic change in their quality of life.
Yeah.
For some, I have to go further with either some more advanced testing or a more rigorous elimination diet, just because they've been ill for so long
Mhm.
that they've developed antibodies against other food proteins as well. So then that's a more complicated situation to sort out.
Yeah, and I see that with my clients as well. Is that for a good majority of people, they just make those changes. What I teach is very similar to the Wahl's protocol. Everything from it's lower protein, higher nutrient dense foods. It tends to be quite low calorie as well. And once they do that, then all of a sudden we see these remarkable changes. Which for years they've been trying to even get some reprieve from their symptoms, and they can't. So but what I know, some people who are listening to this, it's going to be the first time that they're ever hearing that you can you know reverse or slow down the progression of the symptoms of MS. And do
Yeah.
you ever say, like, what do you say to people about your MS? Like, have you reversed it? What's the
So,
language?
so, so here's the language that I use is, excuse me. So here's my experience: 27 years of worsening trigeminal neuralgia. Despite seeing the best people in the country, 7 years of steadily worsening MS, despite seeing the best people in the country taking newer drugs, including the biologics. 4 years in tilt-recline wheelchair. I changed my diet in a very specific way, diet and lifestyle. With my neurologist's blessing, I'm able to go off my drugs. And 12 months later, off drugs for 6 months, I'm able to do a 20-mile bike ride. And if I deviate from my diet and lifestyle, my trigeminal neuralgia turns on to horrific levels. So for me, very clearly, diet and lifestyle is the driver of health or disease. Then I have plenty of folks who say, okay, so progressive MS does not reverse. So your physicians at the Marshfield Clinic of Wisconsin, the Cleveland Clinic of Ohio, the University of Iowa are all incredibly incompetent. You never had MS.
Yeah,
I'm
I
like,
heard that feedback.
okay. So then that we said, okay, and who knows, maybe that's possible. Then the next really important thing is to do a prospective single-arm clinical trial testing my interventions in others with progressive MS, verified by their treating neurologist and our study neurologist. And then we treat them for 3 years and see what happens. Lo and behold, we see a dramatic reduction in the fatigue, a dramatic improvement in quality of life. And half of these folks have clinically meaningful improvement in gait in a condition where you expect a 10 to 20% decline in gait every year.
Exactly.
So as a group, we held them stable. That would be unheard of. And when people are taking all these really potent drugs, they're trying to keep people stable and they have progressive MS. So just the fact that we kept the group stable, that's remarkable. And the fact that half the group had remarkable improvement, really quite remarkable. Then we do another randomized waitlist study with relapsed remitting MS. Again, MS diagnosis verified by the treating neurologist according to the McDonald criteria. You get the study diet. This time we just did diet alone, or you had to wait 2 weeks and then get the study diet. And again, we could show in a prospective way, using blinded assessors, that motor function improved, mood improved, quality of life improved. Then we had another study where we compared, again, waitlist control to the Wahls diet and then to a ketogenic version of the Wahls diet.
Hmm.
And because I wanted to, because there's a lot of reasons to think that a ketogenic diet might be superior. So, I'm open to new ideas. So we test the Wahls diet against the ketogenic diet, against the waitlist control. That paper is under review, so I can't really comment on it. But the fact I'm smiling should tell you something positive about that. And now we have a large study funded by the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, where we'll have a observation period. Then we randomize, and we give them either the low-fat swank diet or the Wahls diet. And then they come back again, and we measure thinking, walking, vision. We do a ocular coherence tomography, so a really detailed look at what's going on in the eyes and the optic nerves. And we measure quality of life, uh, uh, vision, walking, thinking. We have some actigraphs, so we measure how much movement that they have, which also tells us, by the way, the quality of their sleep.
Yes.
And we've done a really detailed look at what they're eating in terms of diet, food frequency questionnaires, and a 3-day weighed food record. We collected a bunch of blood, a bunch of poop. It's going to be just like a phenomenal study. So our last visit will be in January. It's January 20th of 2020. Then we'll be analyzing the data. And depending on when the late breaking abstracts get to be submitted, I'm hoping it's in late April for the International MS Research Meeting that will happen in Washington, D.C. in September, because I'd sure like to be there and presenting on our results.
Yeah, I'd like for you to be there as well. Um, I would like to be there to hear you presenting those results. I have to tell you, when I was at two physicians conferences last year, where it's plant-based nutrition conferences. It's all scientific research that's being presented. It's medical doctors that are up there, it's scientists that are up there, researchers that are up there, and they're presenting. And it was amazing because being an audience member, I'm sitting amongst 1,000 physicians, and we get to talking, and they're like, "Do you really believe this is true?" And I'm like, What do you mean? Like that your peers are up there, they went to the same medical colleges and universities that you did. And it's good to question, like, right,
Oh
like
yeah.
dive deep into the science, read the studies that they're referencing, understand if it was designed well, if there's any bias in there, to do that. But I was amazed because, I said, well, like, let's talk about what, you're questioning. And they would start to talk about it. And I was like, well, and I remember one physician, in fact, I was like, well, do you remember being taught about the Krebs cycle? Because they had mentioned the Krebs cycle. And, these physicians, he said, he's like, oh, I don't remember that. That was so long ago. And, and this is one of the things that, and because I'm thinking about my audience listening, and I know from my clients that they're like, well, why don't my doctors know about this? Could you speak to that a little
So
bit?
sure.
Because
So
it's really hard to understand.
we study a lot of basic science, physiology. Then we have a little bit of that's in our first year. Then we go on to the physiology of disease. Then we go on to drugs, and then suddenly we're treating patients. And we there's so much information. The stuff you aren't using all the time gets crowded out
Yeah.
and falls away. Then on top of that, our understanding of the chemistry and the biochemistry of life, and the intricacy of all the biochemical pathways gets more and more complicated, and it overwhelms us as physicians. We have so much fact-based stuff I have to learn, new drugs all the time, and so it's very hard to keep up. It is very hard to keep up.
Mhm.
They're working with more patients every day, smaller visit times are allowed, more documentation requirements, greater and greater pressure. So for the practicing physician, I actually have a great deal of empathy for
Mm,
their struggle and their suffering.
me too.
I've advocated here at the university that we teach our medical students how to have a nutrient dense diet, either as a vegetarian or a meat eater, according to one's spiritual beliefs, how to have a meditative practice or stress reducing practice, and how to do the 7-minute workout because they're not going to have much time. You got to teach them, how to get a high intensity interval training because they're young. They should be able to handle that so they could survive medical school and
Mhm.
residency, because for them to use it in clinical practice, they're only going to use what they've learned how to use in their daily life. So it would
Exactly.
greatly improve the probability that we would have physicians that know how to cook food, even though you're working long hours, that they know how to manage stress, even though they're working long hours, and they know how to maintain physical fitness, even though they're working long hours. And if they do that themselves, then it's very easy to talk about that in your practice. My young residents used to love to have me. They couldn't wait to come say like, Joe, I can't wait for you to go talk to Jones. He's pretty cantankerous. I don't know how you're going to get him to eat vegetables. And I go in, and again in 5 minutes, I'm able to get this guy fired up about, so, you eat your vegetables or your liver, one or the other, because
Yeah.
your body can't work if it doesn't have the building blocks. You have to use metaphors that your public will understand. So for some of my guys, I could talk about raising the champion steer for the fair. For other guys who talk about fixing the sports car, and you're not going to pour sugar in the gas line for the sports car. So you have to have metaphors that are relatable to your audience.
Right. Yeah. And, you mentioned the stress part. And I have to say that since I first heard your talk and then read everything that I could get my hands on, and I'm lucky I have access to all the scientific journals through my university. And
Yeah.
I've been following you like from that very first study that you did. I think it was
Mhm.
was it 6 patients or 6 participants?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. The first report was the first 6 that came through.
Yeah. And my
Very
heart,
positive.
and it was so positive, but then I read the media feedback from your peers, other medical doctors in the field, and, what you read on the internet. And I just knew, I saw what was happening because it's the same thing that happened to Dr. Max Gerson. He a highly respected doctor. He got sick. He changed his diet. I mean, you and he have identical stories. He healed himself. Other people said, "Oh, what did you do?" So he started, doing research and then treating patients, and they started to heal. And then that's when the quackery, claims started coming in and saying, "Well, you never had this disease in the first place." They tried to completely break down the study, which is great. I think it's great to critique anybody's study that anybody does. But I watched this happen, and I was stressed just thinking about what you had done, what you had gone through, and seeing 100 years later your story playing out exactly like Dr. Max Gerson's. So, how did you handle that, or did you just ignore all of that and keep charging through?
Oh, it just rolls off my back.
Okay,
You
good. So
know,
I didn't need to worry about you at all. That's
you
good.
need to worry about it. In many ways, in some ways, my life prepared me for this. Imagine growing up in rural Iowa, realizing that I'm different from the other girls because I like girls, I don't like boys. I'm like, oh dear God. And so I tried to be straight for a while and realized, well, that's not going to work. And wrestle with who I am. And finally, during residency, realized, okay, I just have to be who I am. But that meant I'd sort of learned that okay, you have to be who you are. People may not uh, like you at first, but if you're comfortable with who you are, they'll get over it. And fortunately for me, the chair of medicine had seen my recovery. He had said, "This is so important. Get the case report written." And my response was like on myself, said yes.
Wow.
So I said, okay. So I got that done. Then he called me back and said, now I want you to do a safety and feasibility study. And I said, well, I don't do clinical trials. He goes, well, you are now, and I'll get you the mentors. This is so important. We need to do that. And then as I was designing that, he got the mentors, and the mentor said, okay, since the IRB said you have to do, I could only do the first 10, although I had mine to do 20, because this was such a radical intervention. I had to have all these safety reports. I said, that's fine. You'll have 2 publications, the first 10 and then the first 20. So we got 2 publications. Um, and then I went back to the Canadians who funded me originally, and they said, so they funded the next 2 studies, small pilot studies. And then in the meantime, the university made a funding source, the Wahls Research Fund, and the university started getting cold calls from philanthropists who said that their lives had been transformed after discovering my work and that they wanted to support my work. And so we had some large donors, which again allowed me to fund these smaller pilot studies, which then gave me incredibly powerful preliminary data for those grants, that larger grant for the MS Society that I'm now doing now. And, when I write these grants to the NIH, when I started writing them 10 years ago, I should have kept those reviews, those remarks. They're just like, really? We physicians, scientists are so mean and nasty and crass to one another. They were calling me all sorts of vulgar things.
They were.
But I just keep writing. I just keep putting it forward. And then I have the incredible opportunity that because I, at the same time, am talking to the public and putting out my instructions to the public, I'm having impacts on millions of people. And some of them actually have money. And some of them call us up and say, yeah, I believe in Wahls. So what's she doing now? Send us a proposal. So we have basic scientists now whose work I'm funding to help them help us understand what are the mechanisms behind what the changes are that occur. Because I've got a freezer of blood, and so my basic scientists at the colleagues, come up to me and say, "Hey Terry, I understand you got a freezer. Like you got plasma or cells or serum," and I said, "Give me a proposal,
Yeah.
and I'll think about letting you have some of my blood."
Amazing. Amazing. And I just read recently that what phase of your trials are you doing? If you can just explain that in very layman's terms for
Oh,
people,
sure.
how that works when you are wanting to design a study, what does that look like? What does that look like
Yeah.
to get it approved? But then also,
Well,
people think you just do a study and you get results, and it doesn't work that way.
it's a complicated process. The first thing you have to know is I only get to study what I have money to do. If I don't
Exactly.
have any money, then I can't do the study. I can think about it, I can design it, I can write it, I can pitch it now to people who I think might want to pay for it. And so that would be to like the National Multiple Sclerosis Society or some foundations in Canada I've pitched to, the National Institutes for Health. And then either they say yes or no and give you feedback. And because the stuff I want to do is so innovative, most often if you go to the MS Society or the NIH, they're not going to be ready because usually those groups want to make small, incremental, little, little baby step by little baby step. If I can work with a philanthropist who has a big vision, then I can have a conversation about here's my big vision and what disease states, what symptoms are they most interested in, and we sort of collaboratively design a study that addresses an area that's of personal interest to them.
Mhm.
And so that gives me a little more flexibility. Then I also have some donors who just say, "Man, I so believe in you. I want you to be able to design fully according to what you think will have the highest impact." And what's the other thing that's interesting? So the university was not quite so sure. They liked my idea of telling the public what I'm doing at the same time that I'm doing it,
Mhm.
um, because people don't usually do that. But now that I've been doing that for 8 years and have this huge following and have this big international impact, now the universities come to realize that there is a lot of insight and wisdom to my approach, and that in fact they would like to have. I've chatted with a variety of departments about this more entrepreneurial approach that I have, and this telling the public more about what you're doing and why,
Mhm.
so you can generate public interest. Because that philanthropic support that lets you get a little pilot data for your idea is huge. Now, the other thing that I do that is unlike any other science that happens is that how science usually happens is you work it out molecule by molecule in a mouse. Then you see if you can work it out in people, and only about I'd say about 90% of the time it doesn't work very well in people.
Mhm.
Um, what I'm doing is I get the spectacular result in one person, me. I get the spectacular result in my patients. Then I get the spectacular result in other MS patients. And so now I'm working with the basic scientists who are saying, like, this is like so cool. I've never been in the position of getting to work out the molecules in a model that we know works in people.
Yeah. And then if you want to understand it further, you could, I guess, go back to the mouse model and really, really
Correct.
try it that
So,
way. Yeah.
then, in order to do that, we have to create the mouse model of the Wahls diet.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
of course, some of the complexities there is so we can, and we're in the process of creating that mouse model. But does the mouse have the same genes that we have? Do
Yeah.
they have the same microbiome? No, of course not. And so even then, it's going to be it will be very interesting. It will be helpful, but still imprecise because biology and life is way more complicated
So
than
complicated
for the
because it's in the
lungs.
context of lifestyle as well and environment and what you're exposed to in Iowa, right? You grow a lot of
Yes,
corn, a lot of glyphosate spray.
a
Like,
lot of glyphosates. Yeah.
yeah, let's talk about glyphosate because we had Dr. Zach Bush. Are you familiar with Dr. Zach Bush's work?
No,
No, let me
but
just quickly tell you because
please.
I think you'd be very fascinated. Dr. Zach Bush, he started off in chemo research. He's a medical doctor. Then he moved into functional medicine, then internal medicine. And now he's basically teaching similar to you. Like at the end of the day, lots of fruits and vegetables. He teaches predominantly plant-based diet to reverse chronic disease with his patients, but he's actually a soil regenerative specialist. And what he saw is that when his patients turned to food as medicine, 30% got better, 30% stayed the same. The disease stopped the progression of the disease, 30% got worse. And when he started to look at why they got worse, he saw that glyphosate was a huge factor. So once he put them all on a 100% organic diet, then all of a sudden he
Mhm.
saw this massive improvement. So if
Yeah,
you could
yeah.
speak to glyphosate and also speak to, is that an important factor with, with when we start
So
eating 10 cups of vegetables a day, what does that mean for people?
so glyphosate changes the soil microbiome
Yeah.
and basically starves the plants, which is why they die. The animals that are eating a lot of uh, grain, soybeans raised in glyphosate, they get a shift in their microbiome. And those of us who are eating glyphosate sprayed foods, grains, get a shift in our microbiome uh, with a huge negative consequence. So, widely used herbicide. I think it's the most widely used herbicide globally, and it's hugely disruptive. Big, big problems for us all. And I believe it's been increasingly associated or linked to a variety of cancers. And I think it's going to be linked to a variety of neurodegenerative diseases as well. In my clinics, again, I want to reiterate, I would we would tell people to improve the quality of their food according to their financial means.
Hmm.
And so most of my folks would start out with conventionally raised foods. Many of our folks who had severe financial constraints were doing gluten-free grains and legumes. But of course, what many people don't realize is that a lot of these grains and legumes are finished dried with glyphosate.
Yeah.
So even if it wasn't a glyphosate ready crop, it's a glyphosate finished crop.
Yeah.
So they get great results, then we're good. If they don't get great results, then we're talking about how to improve the quality and get more organic foods into their diet. And people would, over time, begin to figure out how to get more organic fruits and vegetables and to get exposures to organic bulk grains and legumes. It certainly is a process. Um, and one of the things that I certainly wonder about, and I've not yet done, but um, I would like to check the glyphosate in my water.
Hmm.
See, I have a filtration system in my home, doubly filtered. Is that getting the glyphosate out? And I grow organic garden, but I'm in Iowa.
Exactly.
Glyphosate's in our rain,
Yeah.
so it would be very interesting to see what is my glyphosate residue. But I also take a near infrared sauna every day.
Hmm.
Well, probably 5 days out of 7, and have a variety of strategies to greatly improve my ability to clear the glyphosate and whatever other toxins I'm encountering.
And is that just in your house that you have that? The infrared sauna?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Is there a particular type that you would recommend? Because I know that, people listen to these shows and they want to run out right
So,
away and
so the sauna that I use is Sauna Space.
okay,
It's a near infrared bulb. You can get a single bulb unit,
okay.
or you can get the 5 bulb unit.
Hmm.
And for people who are heat intolerant, then a single bulb unit, so you can keep the bulb far away
Okay.
and bring it gradually closer as as your tolerance for heat improves.
Okay. And okay, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. There is one thing about going back to the mouse model that we were talking about,
Mhm.
that I think is fascinating is that, well, when you want to do studies and you're using mice or whatever other animal, you have to induce the disease that you're studying. So how do they induce the disease in the mice, to get a whole, genetically, similar group that all would have MS or the particular type of, because there's different types of
Right.
MS, they're not?
So there's a variety of induction methods depending on, are you wanting to study the inflammatory component more, or is it more the degenerative component? So there's a copper stress that is used, the cuprizone induced, that's more with neurodegeneration. The experimental autoimmune encephalitis uses a different exposure. And I have to admit, I don't recall what all is used in the exposure for the experimental autoimmune encephalitis group.
Yeah, and the only reason I ask that because I think it's interesting to think about, like, if you want to induce MS in, these mice, is it the same principles that perhaps we
Well,
as humans go through?
and it's not,
Oh, okay.
because we don't really understand what causes MS in people.
Oh,
We say it's a complicated uh, polygene interaction with interacts in complex ways with your lifetime of diet, environmental exposures, infection exposures. And there are a number of infections that appear to be associated. Uh, so we don't know.
mhm. So
These are MS-like illnesses, but they are not MS.
right. And I'm glad that you bring that up because a lot of my clients will come to me and I think they've actually spent more time trying to understand what caused their disease as opposed to just getting to it and make the lifestyle changes to arrest the symptoms and to
You
do
know,
that.
a lot of people investigate all of that very vigorously because they don't want to go through the work of changing habits.
Exactly.
And I have a lot of people who want to spend lots and lots of money on investigations. I'm like, no, you know what? If you're going to work with me, this is the rule in the BI. If you want to work with me, you have to commit 100% that you're going to do gluten-free, lots of veggies, either as a meat eater or not a meat eater. We can work that
Mhm.
out, and that we're going to begin a meditative practice. And if you, and
Beautiful.
it's you and your family, and if you're not ready to do that, that's fine. You can see the dietitian; she'll work with you to improve your diet. But you don't get to work with me. You don't get to be part of our groups because we have a long line.
Yeah,
People waiting to come see me, and we're not going to let you take up a chair if you're still thinking about it.
exactly. Yeah, and that's how at the beginning, I wasn't like that with my clients. I'd be like, I can teach you the science. I can teach you everything. I can help you problem solve around, income and grocery shopping and cooking and all of that. And now I'm just like, hey, this is how we do it. It's 100% or nothing. But
Yep.
what I
Are
do
you
find
ready?
yeah, and people come back. They'll come back in 2, 3 years. They're like, "I didn't
Yep.
get results in the 20 other thousand ways I tried, so let's just get to the work." And, I hate to call it hitting rock bottom, but it almost is like when they arrive at that place where it's like either financial rock bottom, health, chronic pain, fatigue rock bottom, like they just don't know what to do. Then they come around.
And if you think about it like any other addiction, um, s- some people are going to die with their tobacco addiction. Some will die with their gambling addiction. Some will die with their alcohol addiction. And some will be ready to come address their addiction, realize they have to clean their environment. They'll have some relapses,
Hmm.
and some will never get completely clean, but many will. And we're asking them to deal with an addiction.
We are.
So,
Explain that more because I know that there's some people that get irate when we compare a lifestyle and food addiction with
yeah,
alcohol addiction, but I say it's an addiction too.
yeah. Oh, no, no. The science is very, very clear. Uh, after World War II, we created a industrial food supply to feed our troops. And then that industrial food supply didn't want to go away. And so they did very effective marketing to the housewives of America who are becoming liberated and working. So we made their lives easier by having this processed food, which was purchased by the tobacco industry that had a great deal of expertise in creating products that are addictive.
Hmm.
And so our food has been designed to stimulate the pleasure centers of the brain. A lot of dopamine is released. And it has been designed very intentionally using our food scientists to create food that drives overconsumption and creates withdrawal if you're not consuming it. And unfortunately, also creates insulin resistance, a lot of inflammatory cytokines, a leaky gut, increases the vulnerability for autoimmune disease, increases the vulnerability for diabetes, obesity, mental health issues. And because of the way our government is funded. We have a very close relationship with large corporate interests. And it will be very difficult for our government to protect us from these corporate entities that make a lot of money by designing foods that drive overconsumption and addiction. Therefore, the people who will be the most successful are those who realize this is very much like an addiction.
Mhm.
And if you're going to want to have a greater chance of success, you want to exclude all the foods. You're just making one decision. I'm going to not have this in my eating environment anymore. Because if it's in my eating environment, it will somehow find its way in my mouth. I will chew and swallow,
Yeah,
and then I'll be back to over consuming that food.
exactly. And that's so important for people to understand is, parents say, well, how do I get my kids to eat this way? And I'm just like, well, you can't have anything competing in the house. If you have any processed refined food in the house, it'll always win over the fruits and vegetables. I mean, our brain is wired to keep everything so
Yep.
efficient. So if you can eat a bag of salty, oily, potato chips, that's more efficient than eating, 5 cups of, fruits and vegetables, and you have to chew them, you have to digest them. Your brain is going to be like, just go for the chips, right?
Yeah,
Plus you get the dopamine hit.
you get the dopamine hit. Those, uh, 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 yes, our food is designed to get that dopamine hit to be very attractive
Yeah.
to us.
I have to ask you a question based on what's
Yeah.
behind you. Can I do
Oh
that?
yeah. Are you seeing all of my poop emojis?
I love them, but take a look at this. Do you know what this is? Can you see that?
Oh, is that guy pooping?
He's pooping.
Yes.
And it's called I'm probably saying it wrong, but it's a uh, kaka, kakaner. And it's from, I want to say,
The
where my brother,
Philippines.
no, not well, I think it's not Mauritius. It's my brother was just traveling there. He's a biophysicist and biochemist who does cancer research. He lives in Copenhagen, and he was, gosh, where is this from?
You know,
It's anyway, and
so
tell me,
this is marvelous. I just had a post today from someone who had seen a character very much like that, and showed me the front and the back side. And he was traveling in the Philippines. Said, "Oh my God, I saw this. Took a photo. I knew I wanted to share it with you because he's fertilizing, repairing the soil."
that's exactly what it stands for. And it's about the importance of, eating clean and the elimination cycle that goes back into the earth. We refertilize the soil with it, and it's a complete cycle. It's all about health and wellness. And they're celebrated. You can get one that looks like Trump. You can get one that looks like every politician. They're quite
Oh my
spectacular. So
God! So where? I need to get that.
I'm going to send you the information from my brother, and I'm going to actually send you one. I'm going to find one for you and send it to
Oh,
you.
that'll be perfect. We'll have to give that at our next seminar. Our
Exactly.
attendees would love it.
So explain to me why you have the poop emoji behind you. Is it just for laughter is medicine, or is it for something probably a
Well,
little bit
you
more
know,
scientific?
so I think our microbiome is probably the probable probable main mechanism of why the Wahls diet is so healing, because
Yeah,
it changes the microbiome. We rely on our microbial metabolites to run the chemistry of life. That our scientists colleagues would have predicted that we'd have 100,000 genes, but we only have about 25,000 genes. Those other 75,000 genes are there in the microbiome to conduct all those processes that we can't do anymore. That happens in our gut, gets into our bloodstream. Our liver filters out the stuff that's not helpful. The stuff that helps us stays in our bloodstream, goes to where it needs to go. And if we're eating a proper diet with soft, easily passed bowel movements, we're more likely to be able to do all those processes and have good health. So I celebrate poop a great deal. And I'm a farm kid, so the farm kids know that poop is incredibly valuable.
ugh,
Those old farmers, we gathered all that poop up and put it out on the soil, and the the fields that got the poop had high production. Fields
exactly.
that did not get the poop had poor production.
Yeah,
And so my grandparents and my father and my great grandparents would all be so pleased to know that the young daughter who thought she was a smarty pants went off to medical school eventually embraced their wisdom about the importance of
Poop.
fertilizing the stool and just how
Exactly.
valuable our stool is.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more on all of that. I mean, I love talking about poop. We talk about poop around the dinner table, like it's just something that is just so important. I have 3 kids. You have 2 children who are they?
Yes.
They're older now,
Now
probably.
28 and 25.
Oh yeah, they're a lot older. Oh my gosh, they were still living at home, children with you when I first learned about you.
Yes.
Can we talk about that then a little bit? So how, when you were going through, and I read up a lot of your story too, Susanna Meadows' book, The Other Side of Impossible.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we interviewed her a few times on her show, and she's such an amazing woman. And so I learned more about what that looked like in your family when you were discovering all of this and healing. But how did you work this out with your kids with when it came to cooking and eating and
Well, when they were um, before 2008 and I recovered, they had real chores and they had to help us manage life. And they were frustrated that they had to do the laundry and their friends didn't know anything about the laundry. And I'm like, well, they were 10 and they would get really mad. And I'd say, oh, yeah, I could empathize with their resenting chores. I'd say, yep, that's so not fair that I make you do that. And it's so not fair that I can't do it. And it's so not fair that I have MS, but I have to go to work and do the best I can anyway. And this is your chores because I can't do it. This is the family relies on you. And both my son and my daughter stamped their feet and at different times, mind you, and shouted back, "Mom, I think you're glad you have MS. So you can lecture me about chores." I go, "Well, a mom has to work with what she has to work with,"
yeah.
and so it was a big part of their development that they had real chores that they understood was a vital part of their life. And one of their chores was they had to make one meal a week.
Mm,
And so we had nannies, and the nannies would help them, but they would pick out the menu and they did that. And then as I began to recover, then the only foods that could be served was um, basically paleo style meals. And then I decided that I thought their health would improve if I convinced them that they should follow this diet, not only in my house, but all the time. And so actually, I did some testing on my family and did verify that there was gluten sensitivity issues.
mhm.
And so they made big changes to their diets and experienced some big changes in terms of migraine issues.
Oh,
So that was pretty interesting. And I'm like, thank you, God, that there's some acute
yeah.
symptoms that uh, made it worthwhile for my daughter's uh, really eats very well.
Wow.
That it certainly has been a different journey for them, but they're on board. And when we made the decision that as a household, they could eat what they wanted away from the house, but if the wrong food came into the house, it was just getting thrown away.
Mhm.
And if they wanted to order the wrong food at a meal that they expected me to pay for, they got a separate check and they were paying for it. So that was a little like, what?
High five, mom.
Yeah.
Good for you.
So then that was the end of that. Like, okay, I guess I don't want that mac so much that I'm going to order it. I can just order the hamburger without the bun. Like, okay, that works.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and I talk about that with my patients that control only what you can control, which is what you're going to pay for
Yeah.
and what comes into the house. And you can explain to your kids why they should do whatever they're going to do, but recognize when they're away from you, they're going to do whatever they're going to do.
Yeah. Yeah, our daughter works at our restaurant. She's worked there for 3 years, and, dynamite employee, and this year especially, she's turning 15 this month, and she really was like, I really notice that because she makes her own money, right? So she can go out there and spend it on stuff, and I can't control that.
Correct.
And you can't even attempt to try and control that. And so she started to break out with, zits all around her nose. So she had like, some acne a little bit, and she put the two and two together because she's like, oh yeah, you know what, mom, the way we've been eating at home is very different than the way I've been eating out with my friends. And so now she's like, she eats at our restaurant, she eats the food there. When she goes out with her friends, she's making wise choices. It didn't happen overnight. She had to experiment for herself, and she
Correct.
had to see that effect. And now I see it happening, and I'm sure my other two are going to go through the same thing. And as a parent, I think you're going to just have to be okay that they're doing that, because it's experimenting on yourself is,
It's
it's
part of life,
yeah,
and you want your kids to experiment while they're living at home, so they because you don't want them having all those experiments when they first go off to college and they can't come talk to you easily.
exactly.
So much better for them to recognize that they're going to make those choices.
Yeah,
Um, Now, of course, we do have those big conversations about choices that can lead to unexpected life, so that they're very careful about those choices and choices that could lead to unexpected loss of life.
yeah.
Um, but choices about making hopefully be some temporary diet choices that will hopefully be temporary. They have to figure that out.
They do. They do. Um, how was it for you and your wife when you were going through all of this and making these dietary changes? Because I know for myself, my clients, often there's one that comes in and they're like, my partner doesn't want to do it, or my partner says I'm not allowed to do it, or we do have a lot in this day and age where
Yeah.
a lot of men do dictate what their partners still do today with how they cook and how they eat, and a lot of the women succumb. But how was it in your relationship?
Jack was well. It's always very easy because I did the cooking.
Okay.
So that part was easy. As I became more and more disabled, we started hiring someone to cook, and um, this is what they were cooking for us. And then as I began to recover, I did all the cooking. So and Jack could eat whatever she wanted elsewhere, but and I mean, my family was just like so amazed. Think about what it's like to watch someone you love go from being unable to sit up to biking a 20-mile bike ride in a 12 months time period.
It's amazing.
That's an amazing journey to watch and to be part of.
Yeah, no, that is really incredible. So, because we are, a plant-based whole food company, my staff wanted me to ask you about the difference between the Swank protocol and the Wahls protocol, your protocol,
Sure.
and
So so the
just want to know
swank.
about it all.
So here's the common things: vegetables, here, and cod liver oil. We both agree in vitamin D, so that's where we agree. We'd both agree that. Well, I agree that olive oil is really great for you. They have a little bit of olive oil. Then they will want a lot of whole grain legumes are okay. Um, if I had the whole grains, my face pain would be incapacitating.
Hmm.
Legumes in a small amount I could tolerate. They're very, very low fat. And I prefer a diet that's about 40 to 50% fat,
Okay.
because I think fat is critical to have healthy mitochondria, for the fat wrappers around the mitochondria and those
Yeah.
squiggly lines, the fat wrappers inside the mitochondria and all the myelin. You need a lot of fat. You need omega-3 fat, omega-6 fat. Yeah, you need cholesterol, uh, and all of that is in our brain, in those cell membranes, and in the myelin. There's some interesting studies that link a high cholesterol in that 250 to 300 range as being associated with a better remyelination rates. So, but
Okay.
swank's very, very low fat. The commonality, though, vegetables,
Hmm.
unlimited vegetables are good. The original Swank diet let people have as much sugar as they wanted because he was trying to make the diet more palatable.
Mm. On the Swank diet, and how do you feel?
Correct.
And on yours, it's
Well, no, no, no.
no.
1 teaspoon a day.
Yeah, exactly, which is very
Uh,
similar to Gerson as well, as long as
yeah,
it's, coming
one
from,
teaspoon a day or less.
exactly, yeah, and everything else can come from your fruits and vegetables, and,
Yeah.
you're gonna get sugar. Now, with the so let's go back because I want people to understand what is happening with MS, because I know a lot of people don't associate it to being an autoimmune disorder. And I ask my clients, like, do you know that this is a classified autoimmune disorder? And a lot of people are like, really? I didn't realize it was. So their doctors aren't explaining it to them in that way. If
Oh,
you can explain that a little bit better for
well,
people to understand, that would be great.
so the MS has two components. One is these acute episodes of inflammation, which are the body attacking itself. And the other factor is the shrinkage of the brain and spinal cord over time. Most of the drugs can turn off the parts of the inflammation process to stop those inflammation attacks. None of the drugs really attack the degeneration process, which is centered around mitochondrial function. My approach with diet and lifestyle focuses on mitochondria, nutrition, and so that really focuses on stopping the neurodegeneration as well as stopping the inflammation by getting rid of the particularly inflammatory foods.
Right. Okay, so that's fantastic. And then now if we can jump into the mitochondrial function, because I know when Dr. Max Gerson started researching, I mean, he didn't have the technology to see that we even had mitochondria, but he could observe that when his patients switched to a diet very similar to yours, that he saw that there was this process happening inside the cells. So within the
Yeah,
cells and around and he knew that there was an energy production loss as the disease was, being ignited and then continuing, but that he would see it. So reversing that ATP loss was a huge part of the therapy as well. So if you can talk about that and explain to people as well what our mitochondria do, and if you can explain that how our body creates mitochondria as well.
sure. Well, if you go back about 1.5 billion years, uh, our the bacteria in the earth, we had development of cyanobacters, and they could do photosynthesis, and over time, this increased amount of oxygen in the atmosphere, which then led to a crisis because the oxygen actually led to a lot of oxidation, sort of biologic rust, and about 90 to 95% of all life forms died. Uh, and the ones that remained were pretty sickly. But over time, because of random mutations, we got all the steps to make the Krebs cycle. And one particular bacteria was very good with the Krebs cycle in making energy or ATP more efficiently. This ancient bacteria got engulfed by a bigger bacteria, and they developed a symbiotic cooperative relationship, which over enough time led to multicellular organisms, animals, which led to the ability to specialize into organs, and of course would eventually lead into mammals and primates and us. But these ancient bacteria are what runs the Krebs cycle and runs the generation of energy that's much more efficient. And the parts of your body that use the energy the most, so that would be the brain, the retina, and the heart,
Mm.
have the most mitochondria per cell. And the mitochondria fuse and divide, and in terms of the efficiency of how well that mitochondria is working, will determine how efficiently that cell can do its job. And how well that mitochondria is going to work depends on really two things. One is, do you have anti-nutrients in the cell that interfere with the chemical processes? So things like lead, mercury, arsenic, solvents, herbicides, pesticides, and antibiotics
Mhm.
all interfere with the efficiency of your mitochondria. And then, so those are the anti-nutrients. Viruses can sometimes hijack your mitochondria, divert their energy to their nefarious means.
Hmm.
And then the third thing would be, uh, do your mitochondria have the cofactors and the nutrients they need to facilitate each step in the Krebs cycle? Because if
Exactly.
they're missing some of the nutrients, the next step can't work very well and the chemical processes jam up. And again, the mitochondria don't make the ATP or the energy very well. Because
Right.
what allows us to be alive is the energy that our mitochondria can generate for us, that will then be used to facilitate all the other chemistry we need in order to walk, think, sing, digest, make our proteins,
Mm.
make hormones, um, and to do all the complex actions that have to happen as a biological organism.
That is one of the best explanations that I've ever heard. Thank you for that. I know it's going to be really helpful because I talk about the mitochondria a lot in my presentations, and and you could talk about the mitochondria as a 2-hour presentation. It's the most fascinating, I
Oh
think,
yeah, you
part
know,
of our body.
I think one of the reasons I'm so good with this is my college mentor, or rather my medical student mentor, Bill Bean, said at the end of every encounter, ask your patients what they learned and
Hmm.
what are they going to do. And so I'd always do that talking to my vets, and I learned very quickly that my explanations were effective or they were not.
Yeah.
And so that helped me learn how to have metaphors that are understandable by people who have a lot of scientific understanding or very little scientific understanding.
Yeah. And that brings me to, I think, a really important question because I think you are a medical doctor, you're working with patients. Yeah, you were doing your rounds, I think, throughout, the entire time while you were
Yeah,
ill
in the
and
wheelchair. Yeah.
in the wheelchair. And then you moved into being a clinical researcher. You are a scientist, you're a healing hero, you're all of these things. You are the perfect person to answer this question, in my opinion. What do we need to do to change the course of how we as a society operates in relationship to the medical
Well,
practitioners that are out there in the medical schools?
I'll tell you what I'm doing.
Okay, let's do
So
it.
I'm teaching the public,
Mhm,
so the public can get access to information right now. I'm teaching clinicians who want to hear right now, and then I'm doing the clinical research, showing that diet and lifestyle are helpful for symptom control. And then I'm committed to also doing the head-to-head studies of diet, lifestyle without disease-modifying drugs in newly diagnosed, and we'll start with MS because those are the people that I study,
mhm.
compared to a cohort of newly diagnosed MS patients getting standard of care at the MS clinic here at the university. We've raised funds to pay my staff to do that research. The protocol is with the IRB, so they're under the review process. It'll take a couple months to get through. So presumably this fall we'll be in a position where we can start recruiting. And it's going to take doing head-to-head studies comparing
Mhm.
therapeutic lifestyle, no drugs, to standard of care to be able to say this is a real option that
Mhm.
we can offer our patients. And in fact, that every autoimmune patient should be told, do diet and lifestyle first. We'll see if we can cool off your disease with that alone. And maybe you won't need to take these very profoundly expensive drugs.
So
That's my goal.
I love what you are doing, but I see you as one individual, a fish, a tiny little fish in the sea of all the medical practitioners who are out there who are
Oh,
graduating from
absolutely.
med school. So And a lot of doctors I meet, like they've come to our sessions, they've come to our retreats, and they're like, I'm not a scientist. I don't know how to do research. And, and I get that, so am I false in thinking that we can change the medical system so that we could
Well,
produce more people who think like you? Or do
but
they have to go through their own experience?
this is the sequence how it's going to have to go, unfortunately.
Hmm.
Teach the public, create public demand.
Yeah.
We teach clinicians who are ready and want to learn, and then we have to do the science to show that this is a real option. And then when we have the science that shows it's a real option, then those large organizations that are paying the bills
Hmm.
that will see, like, wait a minute, you mean we could use diet and lifestyle as opposed to drugs that cost $100,000 a year? So yeah, I'm playing for the long game.
Yeah, you are.
And I mean, so that's the long game. And people thought it was a little crazy doing it this way, but now more people are getting on board that we have to do it all simultaneously.
Yeah.
We teach the public, we teach clinicians, we do the science. We try to get more people teaching children how to cook
Yeah.
in their after school, before school programs in the religious ed, at the Y, at camp, in school. We need our children to be fired up about cooking using ingredients, not processed foods.
Exactly.
And the internet can do wonderful things. It can do, terrible things with spreading hateful messages,
Hmm.
but it can also be a useful tool for spreading patient and family engagement in that diet and lifestyle are profoundly important.
Exactly.
It's deeply troubling when you look at the health stats for our children. I was talking with pediatricians at our integrative medicine conference that they're projecting 1 in 2 children will have an autoimmune disease. And parents, we may not always do the most for ourselves, but we'll do a lot more for our kids.
Sure.
And when parents begin to realize, like, my child has a neurodevelopmental problem, my child has a health behavior problem, my child has an autoimmune problem, and I could go down this drug pathway, or I could go down this vegetables and fruit and lifestyle pathway. So I choose to be optimistic. I choose to teach the public. I choose to teach clinicians. I choose to have public seminars where I teach the public. I choose to have seminars where I'm teaching clinicians how I think and approach these things. And I choose to go out and work on raising money because I have to do this from philanthropists. So
Hmm.
if any of your um, listeners want to support us, that's terrywahls.com/research. We depend on you to be able to do these wonderfully innovative studies that I'm doing, comparing therapeutic lifestyle to these drugs costing $100,000 a year.
Yeah, no, it is incredible work that you are doing. And I love, the fact that you chose not to simply heal, but that you decided to take that experience and then share it with the public, because I know a lot of people who have healed from their chronic issues, and they just want to move on with their life. And I think we do have an obligation to share that, even if it's a story, even if it's just, in your community, just saying, hey, this is what I did, because a lot of
Yes.
times we can only advance research sometimes when we have that N of one study. You were that N of,
Oh yeah.
right?
Writing the case reports, writing the
Exactly.
case series, incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
So that's again on the list of things that I'm going to do is to collect the case series
Yeah.
so that we could write up these case reports.
Yeah. And I know also for medical practitioners, if you're out there listening to this and you see your patients, and, a lot of you have seen my clients go through you and they've reversed their diseases, but not very few of you have called me to say, hey, so tell me what you did, or they don't follow up with their patient. And I think that's something that's an easy thing that a medical practitioner can do is say, just tell me about what you did. I'm really just curious. You could take some notes about it. You can do something, sure, you're not going to be able to bill out for that time, but I think it's important that we don't discount these. For you, it's going to be an outlier, for a lot of these practitioners that are like, oh, well, it's just a coincidence or they never had the disease. But that's something is to just get curious about what people did when they're able to reverse their symptoms. And I know for us, my daughter was part of a study, and she was an outlier because she healed so fast that they were like, well, we can't have her in the study anymore, and they pulled her out. And I said, well, don't you want to know what we did, like how we live our life? And they were like, well, no, because it's not part of the study. And I said, this is ridiculous. It was a university, like UBC was doing the research. And I'm like, we're an outlier, but don't discount us. Our story is really important. When we start sharing these stories, I think that's when we're going to see even more traction as well.
It is a journey.
It is a journey. So, Dr. Terry Walls, I have a million more questions that I want to ask you, but we're going to save that for a follow up podcast if you would be kind enough to
Yes,
do that
yes.
with us.
Well, the Wahl's protocol is being revised. So have me come back because that new book will be out March 3rd. And so we can talk about that and let your audience know what's going to be new and exciting in the new book.
Okay, great. What's the new book called?
The revised and expanded Wahl's protocol.
Okay, great. So it has the name Wahl's Protocol in there. So we're going to put that in the show notes. And if somebody wants to be a participant in one of your trials, how can they do that?
So if they'll reach out to MS Diet Study at healthcare.uiowa.edu,
Okay.
then you could contact our team. We don't have any study that we're enrolling at presently,
Okay.
but you can be in our registry for future studies. So
Okay.
that's very useful.
And in the meantime, they can pick up your existing copy of the Wahl's Protocol,
Oh, by
start
all means,
implementing.
uh, implement the Wahl's protocol. Think about signing up and coming to the seminar. If you have
Okay.
an autoimmune condition or any brain-related problem, we have hundreds and hundreds of people come. If you're a practitioner, think about coming to the seminar and think about the certification course because it will transform how you motivate your patients and how you think about group visits. So again, you can find all that information at terrywalls.com.
Amazing. And do you have to be a medical practitioner, or can you be a healthcare practitioner of any?
You can be any kind of healthcare license will work.
Okay.
We also have people who have certificates, nutrition certificates. That will work as fine.
Okay, good.
Health coach certificate would also work.
Okay, amazing. And then another question about that is, so you've obviously seen many, many, many patients who have MS, but clearly they must have had other chronic health issues that also healed.
Sure. So again, in my VA clinic, we took people from primary care and from the pain clinic who we just said, look, give us your most challenging patients. They just need to know they're not getting drugs. So we saw people with diabetes, high blood pressure, uh, stabilize their condition, reverse it so they needed less and less medication, and then finally, often no meds. People with a wide variety of autoimmune problems like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, psoriasis, and of course MS, again, stabilize their disease and improve the quality of life, regress symptoms, and again, able to wean their medication. And then people with pain from a wide variety of problems related to a traumatic injury during the war, perhaps an amputation or a small fiber neuropathy. Um, Again, people who had had severe intractable pain, whose pain is steadily diminishing, and so again, doing very well. And we had young guys from Iraq, Afghanistan theaters who came back, had severe obesity after the exposure to the war, that they're able to lose weight and restore sexual function again. So
Hmm.
these guys were like, "Oh my God, doc, it's working." So
You're a
what's
hero.
oh, my love life, my love life. Oh, yes, yes. So
Yeah.
that was a big hit.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that, because I think a lot of people, as they're hearing this, they're going to be like, well, she had MS and I have diabetes. So therefore, I need to do a diabetes protocol. At the end of the day, it's a whole health protocol. It's
Yeah,
about restoring your mitochondrial function. It's about
absolutely.
detoxifying the Krebs cycle. It's about, your whole body is connected. It's one piece. And so it's really hard to heal one disease, not heal the others when you are doing returning to lifestyle medicine and food as medicine. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. So just so that people, if you're listening, please get Dr. Terry Wahl's book, read her book, listen to the TED Talk. If you love reading clinical research papers, then call me. I will get you access to that as well and share that with you.
Yeah, and we have links to all my scientific papers on my website. So if you go to
Exactly.
terrywalls.com/papers, you'll get access to the papers that we've published.
Okay, incredible. And just the last question, just before we let you go back to doing all the important work that you do in the world, is how important is the e-stim in
Okay,
all of this?
so the diet and lifestyle is really good at stopping the damage.
Okay.
If you want to rebuild or rehabilitate, you're going to have to exercise. And e-stim augments the exercise. So
Okay.
it's particularly good for people who've had a lot of asymmetry. So in my case, my left leg was far smaller than my right leg. And so adding the e-stim allowed me to get things back to symmetric strength. And then I continue to use e-stim all of the time. And I'll talk a lot more about this in my revised book,
Hmm.
because I have a lot of scar in my spinal cord. So the output from my brain to my legs will never be the same because of those scars. So I will always exercise and augment on the left side of my legs to keep that symmetry intact. So
Okay.
it's helpful for rehab. So there's two questions. We have to stop the damage and heal. Okay, so we'll do that with diet and lifestyle. If you want your muscles to be stronger, you have to exercise.
Okay. And are we talking about crazy, extensive, vigorous exercise? Or are we talking about,
We talk about starting where you're at
okay,
and working from there.
amazing.
So
Okay.
it depends on the level of disability. Now, when I started, I was so weak that a 10 minutes of isometric exercises was all that I was able to do.
Hmm. And look at you now. You are
Biking for
amazing.
hours, yeah.
Yeah, you're amazing. Dr. Terry Wells, thank you so much for taking the time to be on our show and sharing this invaluable information. You are a light in this world, so keep shining bright, as I know you will be. And thank you so much for putting, it's not easy to go after all those grants. It's not easy to, keep charging ahead all of these years. And you're really doing it in service of humanity and the planet. And so I thank you for that, our entire team at the Green Mustache and Richer Health. Thank you for that.
You're
Deeply.
very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So how did you enjoy that show? Isn't Dr. Terry Walls phenomenal? I can't stress enough what a renegade this woman is. So go out there and learn as much as you can about her, share this information with others, and definitely check out our show notes, because we have a lot of great information in the show notes. For example, you can download a one-page handout of what the Dr. Terry Wahl's protocol looks like. You can access her research papers. You can find out what's happening in her clinical trials. You can also reach out and get in touch with her for speaking opportunities. I know she only speaks to pretty big crowds now because she is in such high demand for this incredible work that's happening. And of course, again, share this work with everyone that you know, because that's the first step in being able to end this chronic disease epidemic that we are faced with. Now, last announcement of the show before we see you in next week's podcast is we are hosting once again our Hollyhock Retreat at Hollyhock on Cortes Island in beautiful British Columbia. So tell your friends, get your family members, sign up for this because there's a limited number of seats. We are going to spend 5 days together where I teach you the Eat Real to Heal protocol. We cook together. We do writing exercises together so we can uncover all of your limiting beliefs around diet and food and disease and all of that. We spend time walking the beach, doing yoga. We go to bed early so that you can enter into a regenerative sleep state. We do the liver detox. Like, we do it all at this retreat. So you definitely want to sign up for that because we have canceled all the retreats for our retreat center this year because we're so busy launching our Richer at Work program, and I'm out there speaking at different events. So we aren't running any retreats out of our retreat center this year, but we definitely stuck to hosting our Hollyhock retreat at the famous Hollyhock Institute on Cortes Island. So sign up today. See you next week for another podcast on the Eat Real to Heal show. I am your host, Nicolette Richer. Bye for now.